The world was a crucible of dust and hot copper, the air thick with the buzzing fury of incoming fire. 6 men, the best of the best, were cornered, bleeding, with nothing left but the grit in their teeth and the memory of their last prayer. Above the chaos, the radio hissed static, a cold, empty promise. This was it, the end of the line. But then a whisper of a new sound, a distant, impossible rumble that clawed its way through the cacophony of war. A voice, calm and clear, sliced through the comms. "Bravo 6, this is Valkyrie. You're too far out. I'm coming to you." The team leader's blood ran cold. He knew that call sign, knew the woman behind the voice. And he knew, with a certainty that was worse than death, that she was about to do the one thing he had always told her he could never forgive. The silence was a lie. The moment their last magazine clicked empty, the enemy's fire intensified, a relentless hailstorm of lead and vengeance. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Midas Thorne pressed his back against the crumbling remains of a concrete wall, the rough texture of the cinder block digging into his Kevlar. The heat of the concrete was a constant, radiating presence, the sun beating down on the unforgiving streets of Ashwak. What had started as a precision capture operation for a high-value target, a regional warlord named Rashid al-Ansari, known for his cruelty and his surprisingly sophisticated network, had devolved into a brutal, grinding fight for survival. "Status report," Marcus bellowed, his voice raw, cutting through the din. He didn't need to see his men to know their condition. He could feel it in the air, in the way the bullets chipped away at their cover, in the strained, ragged breaths on the comms. "Cruise is down, Chief. Left leg. Medevac is a no-go. We're too hot," came the strained reply from Petty Officer First Class Jensen Rook Reyes. Jensen was the team's communications expert, and his voice held a terrifying finality. Marcus's gut clenched. Petty Officer Second Class Javier Cruz Ramirez was a 22-year-old kid with a wife back home and a baby on the way. Marcus had promised him he'd be there for the birth. The promise felt like a lie in this inferno. "Keep his head down, Rook." "We're not leaving him," Marcus ordered, his own M4 a useless weight in his hands now that it was out of ammo. He unsheathed his combat knife, the cold steel a stark contrast to the blazing heat. The knife was a last resort, a tool for a fight he didn't want to have. The plan had been simple. Drop in fast. Snatch al-Ansari from his fortified compound in the old city and exfil before anyone knew they were there. But al-Ansari's intelligence was better than theirs. He hadn't just been waiting. He'd been planning an ambush. The moment they breached the compound wall, a pre-planted explosive device detonated, cutting them off from their support and shattering their exfil route. The 6 of them had been driven out of the compound and into a network of narrow, winding streets, where the enemy, a well-drilled militia, now had them surrounded. The air smelled of cordite, fear, and something else, a coppery tang that was a terrifying omen. Al-Ansari's men, armed with Kalashnikovs and RPGs, were not just a mob. They were a disciplined, well-equipped force. Marcus knew this was no longer a mission. It was a last stand. "Talk to me, Air," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, desperate plea into his headset. "Anything? Cass? Anything at all?" The response was a frustrating crackle of static. He could just make out a few words from their forward air controller, FAC, back on the carrier. "Out of range, Midas. Diversionary op on the east flank. Is holding us up. Stand by. Stand by." Jensen's voice, a horrified whisper, cut through the comms. "We're a sitting duck here. They're flanking from the north, Chief. The wall is coming down." Marcus grit his teeth. He knew the protocol. The rules were in place for a reason. He couldn't ask for an airstrike in this close-quarters urban environment. The risk of collateral damage was too high, the chance of hitting one of his own men too great. Their position was just a few hundred yards from a residential block, and while the streets were deserted, the buildings were not. Suddenly, a new voice broke through the static. Not the robotic, stressed-out tones of the FAC, but a voice Marcus knew. A voice he hadn't heard in 5 years, not since the day he left her standing on an airstrip with a broken heart and a promise he'd never be able to keep. "Bravo 6, this is Valkyrie." Marcus's blood ran cold. Valkyrie, the call sign of Captain Evelyn Evie Reed, a hotshot A-10 Warthog pilot. She was a legend, known for her aggressive flying and her uncanny ability to hit a target from a hair's breadth away. But she was also reckless, a maverick who didn't believe in following orders she considered bureaucratic. "Valkyrie, get off this net," the FAC's voice, now a frantic shout, cut in. "You are not cleared for this sector. We have a no-go. For Cass." "Noted, Viper." Evie's voice was calm, almost bored, but Marcus could hear the steel beneath the casual facade. "Just out on a recon flight. Heard a faint distress call. Figured I'd take a look. Got a good visual on the Bravo. 6 position." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat was suddenly dry, his mind racing back to a time before the war had ground them both down into who they were now. He saw a young woman with a wild glint in her eyes and a fierce determination to prove herself, both to the Air Force and to him. She was the one woman he had ever truly loved, and the one he had pushed away to keep her safe. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She had followed him to the one place he never wanted her to be, the very edge of death. Jensen, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding in Marcus's head, let out a whoop of relief. "Rook to Valkyrie. We're at the corner of Al Jazeera and Maine. We're pinned down. We're out of ammo. We've got 1 man down, and they're moving on our position." "Copy that, Bravo 6. Evie's voice was as steady as a rock. "I've got your position. Looks like a whole damn hornet's nest down there. Viper, tell me again why this is a no-go." "Valkyrie, that's a hard no. The risk of fratricide is too high. You're out of your lane. Return to base immediately," the FAC ordered, his voice strained with authority. Marcus finally found his voice, a low growl of a man facing the end. "Valkyrie, this is Midas. Don't do it. Don't you dare." There was a moment of static, a pregnant pause that seemed to stretch into an eternity. Evie's voice, when it came, was soft, but the power behind it was unmistakable. "You didn't think I'd just let you go without a fight, did you, Marcus? Not this time." The words hit him like a physical blow. He had expected her to be angry, to be cold, but not this. Not this raw, emotional declaration of a promise he had never even asked her to make. He didn't have time to process it. A thunderous roar, distinct from the distant gunfire, ripped through the sky. It was the sound of a GAU-8 Avenger cannon. The A-10's signature weapon, its 7 barrels a terrifying promise of death from above. It was the sound of her. "Rook to Valkyrie, you're too low! Abort! You're gonna hit the building!" Jensen screamed, his voice a mix of terror and awe. "Negative, Bravo 6. Evie's voice was now sharp, focused, a pilot in her element. "I'm taking the high ground. I see the flankers. I'm going for a short burst. Tell me where your man is." Marcus, ignoring the adrenaline-fueled panic of his men, slammed his back against the wall, a wave of despair washing over him. He knew her tactics. She would come in low, flying a ridiculous, dangerous line that would give her the best angle to hit the targets without hitting his men. It was a move so audacious, so stupid, that it was brilliant. But if she missed by even a millimeter, the consequences would be catastrophic. "He's at the base of the north wall, Valkyrie, by the rubble pile. Don't hit the rubble," Jensen shouted. "Copy that. Inbound now. Cleared to fire. Hold on tight, Midas." The last 3 words whispered, so only he could hear them, made Marcus's blood run cold. She was doing this for him, for them. And if she failed, if she died, he would have to live with that for the rest of his life. The roar of the jet engine grew louder, a roaring beast tearing through the air. The A-10, a monstrous shadow against the blistering sun, streaked past at a horrifyingly low altitude. The sound was deafening. The sheer force of the jet's wake, a physical wave that slammed into their position, kicking up dust and debris. And then the sound of the GAU-8, the brrr-t of the cannon, a sound like 1,000 chainsaws tearing through a steel wall. A massive, terrifying, beautiful roar. The sound was accompanied by a blinding flash of light as the depleted uranium rounds, each the size of a beer bottle, ripped through the air. The bullets hit the building where the enemy was flanking them, not on the wall itself, but just above it. The top half of the wall seemed to disintegrate in a cascade of dust and concrete, a storm of lethal shrapnel tearing through the enemy positions. The gunfire from that side of the street instantly ceased, replaced by the world fractured. It wasn't a metaphor. The ground beneath Marcus's feet, already stressed by the concussive force of the first strike, now gave way completely. The street, a solid expanse of baked earth and splintered asphalt just moments before, split down the middle with a groan of tortured concrete. Dust and debris filled the air, choking him, blinding him. The world became a maelstrom of noise and chaos, a horrifying symphony of grinding metal, collapsing stone, and human. Screams, both theirs and the enemy's. "Fall back! Get out!" Marcus bellowed, his voice lost in the cacophony. He didn't have to tell them twice. The 6 of them, a shattered unit now, scrambled away from the growing chasm. The ground buckled, sending them stumbling. Petty Officer First Class Derek Wrench. Walker, the team's demolitions expert, caught himself just as he was about to tumble into the abyss. He was the one who had cleared the compound of explosives, or so he thought. The look of utter devastation on his face was a mirror of the one Marcus felt in his soul. They had been played. Utterly, completely played. Jensen, clutching Cruz to his chest, dragged the wounded man away from the crumbling edge. Cruz's face was a mask of pain and confusion, his eyes darting from the collapsing street to the smoke plume rising in the distance. The plume that meant a school they had just been a part of destroying. The remote detonation was the final vicious act of a meticulously planned ambush. Al-Ansari and the Viper weren't retreating. They were executing their plan. The comms were a cacophony of terror and disbelief. "Midas, I didn't see them. I didn't see the children. I swear to God, I didn't see them." Evie's voice was a raw, panicked scream. The cool, detached demeanor of Valkyrie was gone, replaced by the shattered voice of a woman who had just made an impossible mistake. "Valkyrie, get out of there! Now!" Marcus ordered, his voice laced with an authority that wasn't his to give. "The whole world just saw you do that. You're a liability, you're a target, you're a ghost now. They're going to be coming for you." His words were cold, brutal, but they were the truth. Evie had gone rogue, ignored a direct order, and in doing so had become a pawn in Al-Ansari's twisted game. The world would see the A-10 as a symbol of American cruelty, not as a desperate act of salvation. The media would have a field day. Their mission, their reputation, their lives, everything was gone. Negative, Midas. Evie's voice, though still shaky, had regained a sliver of its steel. "I'm not leaving you, not now. I have a visual on Al-Ansari and the Viper. They're moving north towards the old market. If they get into the city, we'll never find them again." "Evie, stop!" Marcus shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. "Don't you dare follow them! They're baiting you! They want you! They want to prove their point with your wreckage!" "You are to return to base, and you are to prepare for the court-martial of your life." A chilling laugh, hollow and devoid of humor, echoed on the comms. "A court-martial is the least of my worries right now, Marcus. I'm already a ghost. I'm already in deep, so I might as well get the bastards who put me here." The A-10, a dark smudge against the blazing sun, banked again. It was a clear act of defiance, a final middle finger to the rules, to the protocols, to the military machine that was about to turn on her. "She's gone full renegade," Petty Officer First Class Ethan Ghost Vance, the team's sniper, muttered, his voice a low, horrified whisper. "She's not listening to anyone." Marcus didn't have time to process the emotional ramifications of Evie's actions. The enemy, initially scattered by the blast, was regrouping. He could hear them now, the shouts of the militia, not just from their initial positions, but from all around them. They were no longer just pinned down. They were hunted. "Rook, get Cruz's pressure bandage on," Marcus barked, his mind shifting from the strategic to the tactical. "Ghost, get to the high ground. Give me a line of sight. Wrench, what have you got?" I'm out, Chief," Wrench stammered, his face pale. "I used my last demo charge to get us through the first wall. I've got nothing left." "Then you're our eyes and ears," Marcus said, his gaze hard. "Find us a way out. We can't go back and we can't stay here." The ground beneath them groaned again, a new crack snaking across the street, a hungry, gaping maw. A plume of dust erupted from the north, and a hail of gunfire followed. The militia had their scent. They were coming for them, and this time, they weren't just fighting to kill them, they were fighting to capture them. A live SEAL team, caught on video after a school bombing, would be a propaganda victory Al-Ansari would never forget. "They're coming for us!" Jensen screamed, struggling to move Cruz. "They know we're here. Then we give them a fight they'll never forget," Marcus growled, his knife a cold, steady presence in his hand. He saw the enemy now, emerging from the smoke and dust, their faces contorted with rage. They were moving with a new kind of purpose, not just to kill, but to corner. Their eyes weren't fixed on the SEALs' weapons, they were fixed on the SEALs themselves. "They want us alive," Ghost's voice came through on the comms, a low, menacing whisper. "They're not even trying to hit us. They're trying to suppress us." "Then we'll make them wish they hadn't," Marcus said, his mind working at a feverish pace. He had to use the one thing they had left, surprise. The enemy, high on their perceived victory, would be expecting them to be broken and defeated. They wouldn't be expecting a fight. "Wrench, what's our exfil?" Marcus asked, his voice low and calm. "There is no exfil, Chief," Wrench replied, his voice laced with the same grim finality as Jensen's had been before. "We're in a no-go zone. The FAC just called us in as MIA. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. MIA, missing in action. They weren't just abandoned, they were erased. "Then we improvise," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the rooftops. He saw it then, a narrow, dusty alleyway, a small, forgotten crack in the urban jungle. "We're going to run. Wrench, you and Ghost go over the rooftops. Jensen, you and me, we're taking the street. We'll draw their fire, give them a moving target. Get Cruz to that alleyway. We'll meet you there." "Chief, that's suicide," Jensen shouted. "No," Marcus said, his voice hard. "It's a diversion. Now go." Jensen, without another word, hoisted Cruz onto his back, the wounded man groaning in pain. He sprinted, a limping, desperate figure down the street towards the alleyway, the sound of his footsteps a rhythmic, terrifying echo. Ghost and Wrench, meanwhile, scaled the wall, a blur of motion against the sky. Marcus, his heart pounding in his chest, gripped his knife, the cold steel a comforting weight in his hand. He sprinted, a lonely, defiant figure, down the street. In the opposite direction, he was bait. He was a lure. He was a target. And he was going to make sure they paid for every step they took to follow him. The militia, seeing the two figures splitting up, fell for it. Half of them, the more disciplined ones, went after Ghost and Wrench on the rooftops, assuming they were the more dangerous threat. The other half, the more bloodthirsty ones, went after Marcus. They saw him, a single man, alone, unarmed, and they saw a trophy. He led them on a chase through the labyrinthine streets, the sound of their footsteps a relentless, drumming beat behind him. He was a phantom, a ghost in the machine, using his knowledge of the city's underbelly to his advantage. He ducked into alleys, scrambled over walls and scaled rooftops, a blur of motion against the sun. He was a one-man army, and he was fighting for the only thing he had left, his life and the lives of his men. Suddenly, a new sound, a sound of roaring engines and grinding metal, echoed through the streets. It wasn't the A-10. It was the sound of a Humvee, a heavily armored, American-made military vehicle. It was an impossible sight, a symbol of everything they had lost, and it was coming for him. And as the Humvee screeched to a halt, a figure emerged, not a member of the militia, but a man in a tactical uniform, his face covered by a tactical mask. It was the Viper. Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He was cornered. There was no way out. The militia was behind him, and the Viper was in front of him. The trap was sprung, but the Viper didn't raise his gun. He simply stood there, his eyes fixed on Marcus, and slowly, deliberately, he pulled. Down his mask, Marcus's blood ran cold. The man's face was familiar. It wasn't Al-Ansari's second-in-command. It was Captain Samuel "Hammer" Harris, a decorated Marine Force recon officer, a man Marcus had trained with, a man he had trusted, a man who had gone dark 5 years ago and was presumed dead. "Hello, Marcus," Hammer said, his voice calm, even, friendly. "I'm sorry about the school. We didn't want it to be like this, but you were the only one who could have stopped Al-Ansari from getting away. And you're the only one who knows what he's planning next. We need to talk." And with that, Hammer gestured to the open back of the Humvee. Inside, tied up and gagged, was Al-Ansari himself. The twist was so profound, so gut-wrenching, that Marcus could only stare in disbelief. Hammer wasn't the Viper. He was a Black Ops agent, working a deep undercover mission, and he had used Marcus and his team as bait to get to Al-Ansari. He had sacrificed the SEAL's reputation, Evie's career, and the lives of a few dozen civilians in a staged bombing, just to get his hands on the one man who could reveal the true nature of Al-Ansari's global network. The final gut-wrenching revelation was not just that they had been used, but that the man who had used them was one of their own. It was a betrayal of the highest order. The streets were silent now, save for the low rumble of the idling Humvee engine. The militia, seeing the armored vehicle and the Viper, now revealed to be Hammer, had melted back into the shadows. They weren't Al-Ansari's men, not entirely. They were a secondary force, a distraction, and now their purpose was fulfilled. They were gone. Marcus stood frozen, his mind a maelstrom of shock and rage. He saw Hammer, the man he had once trusted with his life, the man he had mourned for. 5 years standing before him. He saw the cold, calculated look in his eyes, a look that said the last 5 years of a friendship meant nothing in the face of a larger mission. But most of all, he saw the man gagged and bound in the back of the Humvee, Al-Ansari, their target, their enemy, now their prisoner. The irony of it was a bitter, nauseating taste in his mouth. "Talk," Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He didn't have a weapon, but the cold, hard rage radiating from him was a more powerful threat than any gun. "Talk, or I swear to God, I will tear you apart with my bare hands." Hammer, unfazed, leaned against the side of the Humvee, a weary sigh escaping his lips. "It's a long story, Marcus, and we don't have a lot of time. The militia might be gone, but we've got a lot of angry people looking for us now. The kind of people who don't care about a flag or a uniform." "The school, Hammer," Marcus spat the words out like venom. "Tell me about the school." Hammer's gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of something that might have been regret. "A necessary casualty. Al-Ansari was moving his true assets out of the city. We knew we had a small window. We needed to create a diversion, a smokescreen. The school, it was already abandoned. We planted a small charge, just enough to create a spectacle, enough to make a statement. Al-Ansari wanted the world. To think you did it. He wanted to use you as a propaganda tool. We just gave him the stage to do it." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Abandoned? You detonated a charge at an abandoned school and framed us for it?" "It wasn't a school, Marcus," Hammer said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It was a known training, ground for Al-Ansari's child soldiers. We knew he would use it to his advantage. The blast. It took out a key command center for his network, and now we have him. Mission accomplished. The words hung in the air, a chilling mix of truth and deception. Marcus wanted to believe him. He wanted to believe that the children Evie saw on the screen were not real, that they were a hallucination, a cruel trick of the eye. But his gut told him otherwise. He knew Al-Ansari's cruelty. He also knew Hammer's cold, calculating logic. The truth was probably somewhere in between, a tangled web of lies and half-truths that would never be fully untangled. "What about Evie?" Marcus asked, the question laced with a new kind of fear. "She was just up there, flying around. She's going to be looking for answers. She's going to be looking for us." "She's a loose cannon now," Hammer said, his voice hardening. "She went against a direct order. She's a ghost. We're all ghosts now. We've got to find her, and we've got to deal with her." The words hung in the air, a silent threat. Deal with her. Marcus knew what that meant. He knew the protocol. She was a liability, a loose end that could unravel everything. His heart clenched. He had spent the last 5 years running from her, and now he had to protect her from his own. "Where? Are your men?" Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the rooftops, the sound of his own men a distant, terrifying thought. "They're fine," Hammer said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "They're exactly where they're supposed to be. They're waiting for us. We've got a lot of ground to cover." Marcus's mind raced. He had to make a choice. He could fight Hammer, but he was unarmed, and his team was scattered. He could go along with him, but he couldn't trust him. He had to buy time. He had to get to his men. He had to get to Evie. "What's the plan, Hammer?" Marcus asked, his voice low and steady, a mask of calm over a furious storm. "We get Al-Ansari to a secure location," Hammer said, gesturing to the back of the Humvee. "He's got a lot of information, the kind of information that could bring down an entire network of global terrorism. We need to get it from him, and we need you, Marcus. You're the only one he respects, the only one who can get him to talk." The buy request was a punch to the gut. Marcus knew Al-Ansari. He had spent years studying his movements, his tactics, his motivations. He was a psychopath, a man who believed in nothing but power, but he was also a man who understood a certain kind of honor, a certain kind of code. He might talk to Marcus, but he would never talk to Hammer. "Fine," Marcus said, the word a bitter taste on his tongue. "I'll help you. But my men, you get them out of here. You get them back home. You clear their names. You clear Evie's name. You make sure the world knows they were a part of a Black Ops mission, not a school bombing." Hammer laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Marcus. You're a ghost. Your team is MIA. Your girl is a renegade. We have all the leverage here." The words were a brutal, cold truth. Marcus felt the familiar, suffocating weight of being trapped. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. He could either go along with Hammer's plan and risk losing everything, or he could fight him and risk losing everything. "Then I'll get to work," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. He walked over to the Humvee and opened the back door. Al-Ansari, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury, stared up at him. The man's face was a mask of hatred, and Marcus knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that this was not going to be easy. And as he looked at the bound man, he saw something else, a new detail that made his blood run cold. Al-Ansari's gold ring, the one he had seen in the targeting pod feed, was not just an ordinary ring. It was a signet ring, a family crest, a symbol of a dynasty. And on the crest was a single, stylized snake, its fangs dripping with venom. The same snake he had seen tattooed on Hammer's arm years ago, a symbol of a secret society he had thought was just a myth. The betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. Hammer wasn't just a Black Ops agent. He was a part of Al-Ansari's network. And Marcus, the one man who could get Al-Ansari to talk, was now a pawn in a game far older and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The final gut-wrenching revelation was not just that they had been used, but that the man who had used them was not a betrayer, but a double agent. And Marcus, in his desperate attempt to save his team, had just walked right into the heart of the conspiracy. The interior of the Humvee was a coffin on wheels, a small rattling box of lies and betrayal. Marcus sat in the back, the cold steel of the vehicle's interior a stark reminder of his predicament. Across from him, Al-Ansari was a silent, simmering volcano of rage, his eyes burning with a hatred that was almost a physical presence. In the driver's seat, Hammer, the man Marcus had once called a brother, drove with a casual, almost bored efficiency. The Humvee rumbled through the dusty streets, a phantom on a mission to an unknown destination. "You're taking this awfully well for a man who just lost everything," Hammer said, his voice a low, mocking hum. Marcus didn't respond. He had to think. He had to be a ghost. He had to detach. He was no longer a soldier. He was a spy. He was in the belly of the beast, and his only goal was to get his men out and find a way to take down the men who had put them there. "You know I always admired that about you, Marcus," Hammer continued, a bitter smile on his lips. "Your ability to turn off the emotional side. That's what made you so good. It's what made you a leader. But now you're a liability. An emotional one, at that." "The snake on your arm, Hammer," Marcus said, his voice a cold, steady blade, the signet ring on his finger. Tell me what it means. Hammer's smile widened. That's a long story, my friend. A story for another time. A story that involves a lot of powerful people. People who move the pieces on the board. People who believe that chaos is a necessary evil, that sometimes you have to burn down the village to save it. The words were a brutal echo of every tactical decision Marcus had ever made, every justification he had ever used to send men into a meat grinder. It was a philosophy he had always feared, a path he had always tried to avoid, and now he was, staring it in the face. The Humvee's headlights cut through the encroaching darkness. The city was a maze of crumbling buildings and forgotten alleyways, but Hammer drove with a practiced ease, a man who knew the city as well as he knew the back of his hand. They were heading out of the city, towards the desolate, wind-swept desert. I'm going to need a comms line, Marcus said, his voice as steady as he could make it. I need to get in touch with my men. I need to make sure they're safe. Hammer laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You're not in a position to demand anything, Marcus. Your men are exactly where they're supposed to be. They're being taken care of. But they're not a part of this anymore. They're just collateral damage. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt a wave of rage so powerful it threatened to consume him, but he pushed it down, deep inside, where it could be stored and used later. He had a mission now, a new mission. Then I have no reason to help you, Marcus said, his voice a dangerous whisper. I have no reason to get him to talk. I have no reason to do anything but sit here and wait for my chance to kill you. The threat hung in the air, a cold, hard promise. Hammer, for the first time, seemed to take him seriously. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes a cold, hard stare. You'll help us, Marcus, because you're a soldier, Hammer said, his voice low and serious. You're a man of your word, and you know, deep down, that this is the only way to get to the truth. You're the only one who can talk to him. You're the only one who can get him to reveal the location of the other cells, the ones who are going to do to other cities what he just did here. You're the only one who can stop it. The words were a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Hammer was preying on Marcus's greatest fear, his greatest weakness, his sense of duty. He was offering him a way to save the world, at the cost of his own soul. The Humvee came to a stop. They were in the middle of nowhere, a desolate expanse of sand and rock. Before them, an unassuming door was set into a rock face, a hidden entrance, to something dark and terrible. Hammer got out of the Humvee, a rifle in his hand, and gestured for Marcus to follow. Marcus hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting to the bound man in the back. Al-Ansari, in a low, guttural voice, said a single word that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. Kor. The word, a name, a call sign, was not directed at Hammer. It was directed at Marcus. Kor. It was Evie's sister's call sign, a name Marcus hadn't heard in years. Her sister, a Marine pilot, had been killed in action 5 years ago. Marcus stared at Al-Ansari, his mind reeling. The warlord's face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were filled with a strange, knowing glint. He knew something about Kor, something that was a part of this conspiracy, something that had been a lie. She was not killed in action, Al-Ansari said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. She was executed. And the man who gave the order, he wears the same ring. He is the one who sent me here. He is the one who sent you here. The Humvee door slammed shut. Hammer was a silent, menacing shadow in the darkness. Marcus was alone, with a man who had just revealed a conspiracy far larger and far more personal than he had ever imagined. His sister, the one person he had left, was not a victim of war. She was a victim of the very men he was supposed to trust. The final gut-wrenching revelation was not just that they had been used, but that the conspiracy was not just a plot to gain power. It was a blood feud, a vendetta that had cost him everything, and that was now threatening to consume the one person he had left. The true puppet master was not Al-Ansari or even Hammer, but someone far higher up the chain of command, someone who had framed the Seals and Evie for a personal vendetta against their family. The Humvee door slammed shut, its heavy thud a final echoing punctuation on a life Marcus no longer recognized. He was alone with a ghost from his past and a demon he had been sent to capture. The air was thick with the scent of dust and diesel, but beneath it all, a new smell began to creep in, the coppery scent of vengeance. Al-Ansari, bound and beaten, looked up at Marcus. The warlord's eyes, once full of a manic rage, were now calm, cold, and calculating. He was no longer a cornered animal. He was a chess master. "Core," Marcus repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me everything." Al-Ansari smiled, a grim, humorless twist of his lips. "Everything? The man you call Hammer, the man who wears the snake. He is a small piece of a very large serpent, a serpent that slithered its way into your military long ago. It is a brotherhood of power, of men who believe they are above the law. They orchestrated the attack that killed your men in Kandahar. They set me free to create chaos here, all to justify a war they wanted to start." Marcus's blood ran cold. The Kandahar attack. A black day in their unit's history. A convoy ambush that had killed 3 of his men and left him with a scar that would never heal. The official report called it a coordinated insurgent attack. Al-Ansari was telling him it was a setup. Why? Marcus's voice was a strained whisper. Because one of your men was the brother of the man who led the Brotherhood. He was in their way. He was going to expose them. They used me to kill him. And when your unit survived, they used me again. They framed you for an attack on a school. They used your woman as a puppet in their game. They gave her the mission to give her a chance to be a hero, only to use her as the ultimate distraction. The words were a brutal, unforgiving truth. They were not just a conspiracy. They were a personal vendetta against a man who had dared to stand up to them. And Evie, the woman he had loved, the woman he had pushed away to protect her, was now a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. "Why not just let me go to my death?" "Because they betrayed me too, Marcus," Al-Ansari said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "They promised me power. They promised me a kingdom, but they were just using me. They were just using me as a tool to create chaos. And now, they have me here in this box, waiting to be killed. I have nothing left to lose. And I have one last chance for revenge." He paused, a look of grim determination on his face. "You and I, we have a common enemy. The man who wears the snake. The man who orchestrated everything. The man who wants to destroy us both." A new wave of rage, cold and focused, washed over Marcus. He no longer saw Al-Ansari as a terrorist. He saw him as a victim. He saw him as a tool. And in that moment, he saw himself, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice low and steady. "What do you want in exchange for this information?" Al-Ansari's eyes held a strange, knowing glint. "I want to live. I want to tell the world the truth. And I want to watch the man who betrayed me burn. You help me, and I'll help you. I'll give you the information you need, the locations of their assets, the names of their agents, everything. But you must promise me one thing. You must promise me that you will get me out of here, alive." The offer was a devil's bargain. It was a deal with a man who had killed his friends and framed his lover. But it was also the only way out, the only way to save his team, to clear Evie's name, and to get to the truth. "I'm listening," Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. And as Al-Ansari began to speak, a new sound, a sound of heavy boots and a clicking of a rifle bolt echoed from the outside. Hammer was back. "We're here, Marcus." Hammer's voice was a low, mocking hum. "It's time to get to work." The Humvee door opened, and Hammer, a rifle in his hand, stood in the doorway. He looked at Marcus, then at Al-Ansari, a look of triumph on his face. He was a man who had just won, but as he looked at Marcus, he saw something new in his eyes, a cold, hard glint of a man who had just found his purpose. "He's talking," Marcus said, his voice a low, steady blade. "He's telling me everything." Hammer's smile widened, a cruel, triumphant smirk. "Excellent. Let's get him inside. We have a lot of work to do." And as Marcus was led out of the Humvee and into the hidden base, he caught a glimpse of something in the corner of his eye. A small, unassuming flash drive, a key to a world of secrets, a key that Al-Ansari, in a moment of audacious defiance, had just dropped onto the floor of the Humvee. It was a key to a world of lies, a key to a world of vengeance. And it was all his. The final gut-wrenching revelation was not just that Al-Ansari was playing a game, but that he was using Marcus as his pawn. He was using Marcus to get out of the base, to get his revenge, to destroy the very men who had betrayed him. He had given Marcus a key to a secret world, but he had also made him a puppet. And Marcus, in his desperate attempt to save his friends, had just become a weapon in a war he had no control over.